The wrestling world this week had a very big loss. One of the legendary performers in the industry, Pat Patterson. Got to talk a little Pat Patterson to close out this broadcast. So, I mean, anyone who's been watching wrestling for even throughout the 2000s, but definitely for a long period of time, is familiar with Pat Patterson. And I just wanted to go through kind of his history in the business, talk about some of the highlights, and then I'll probably I'm just going to give you a broad overview, and then I'll probably throw it to Kyle because he's our top historian on this show and see what he has to add. But, I mean, when we look back at this show tonight, we had a lot of fun stuff to talk about. Obviously, this isn't fun. It was a huge loss, as I said. You saw tributes pouring in from all over the industry, including The Rock, who was kind of like the protege of Pat Patterson when he got into the wrestling business, and he had a heartfelt tribute out there to Patterson. Yeah, I mean, WWE Hall of Famer, first ever WWE Intercontinental Champion. He was 79 years old, passed away on Wednesday, December 2nd. He had been rushed to the hospital on November 27th due to a blood clot in his liver. So Patterson was known, as I said, as the first ever Intercontinental Champion in the then WWF. He was the WWF North American Heavyweight Champion at the time, and he became the inaugural Intercontinental Champion September 1st, 1979. And some little bit of trickery going on here because it was said he had unified his title with the South American Heavyweight Championship in a tournament in Rio de Janeiro, although the tournament and the South American Championship were entirely fictional. So that was
wink.
Made up story.
Yes.
Made up story.
I love that part in the Over the Edge introductions when Finkel says he won a grueling one-night tournament in Rio de Janeiro, and Jim Ross goes, wink, wink. And that was like the first. That was a fun breaking down of the fourth wall that they had started doing during that period. And by the way, the PWI Almanac, do you remember who they said he beat in the final?
Oh, I had that. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember.
Ted DiBiase.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if you're watching the YouTube stream right now, you are looking at a picture of Pat Patterson with that original Intercontinental Championship belt. And, I mean, that's what he was known for then in the WWF. But, I mean, he had a long, storied career before that moment in time. He was also known, of course, not only as the first Intercontinental Champion, but as one of Vince McMahon's most trusted advisors. He was the Vice President of Talent Relations, instrumental in building the WWF and then into the WWE period here in the 2000s. He was one of the most trusted men in the locker room, especially when it comes to the psychology of putting matches together. He famously created the Royal Rumble concept, which was inspired by his days working for Roy Shire, who had a Cow Palace Battle Royal in San Francisco, California. But in addition to being the inaugural IC champion, Patterson was a legendary wrestler in Northern California. As I said, he was the top single star in the territory through most of the 70s, specifically 72 through 77. But before that, he famously tagged with Ray Stevens. They were the Blond Bombers, one of the best tag teams, and Patterson, one of the best tag team wrestlers of all time. That team originally achieved stardom in the mid-60s in San Francisco, as well as Hawaii. Huge stars in Hawaii whenever they would fly in. And they tagged together off and on right up until holding the AWA tag titles in the late 70s. Then Patterson moved to the WWF, had a memorable feud with Bob Backlund that included 4 straight sellouts at Madison Square Garden. I think it's a record that still stands as far as like the same guys working matches. And then he and Sergeant Slaughter, and this is what I'm going to ask Kyle about, had a really famous, incredible alley fight in 1981 that was the match of the year that year. Of course, later he refereed the main event of the first WrestleMania, featuring Hulk Hogan and Mr. T taking on Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff. Muhammad Ali was on the outside. Muhammad Ali had been advertised as a special referee, but because of Ali's deteriorating health, it's obvious that he wasn't going to be able to do that, so they kept him on the outside, and at kind of the last minute, they added in Pat as the referee in the ring. Lastly, must be mentioned, Patterson, a legendary singer when it comes to karaoke, always bringing down the house with his rendition of Frank Sinatra's My Way. In the business, he was really, really well known for that. But Kyle, I mean, first of all, the viewers are seeing this on the screen, that 1981 match with Sergeant Slaughter. Have you seen that? What do you know about that match? You're our history guy here. Thoughts on that, or in just Patterson in general?
Yeah, it's really good by 1981 standards, particularly 1981 WWF standards. So if you haven't seen it, I would advise you to check it out. Is it the 1981 match of the year? Maybe. You're putting me on the spot. I'm trying to think what would be a contender in 1981.
According to Meltzer, it was the match of the year.
Okay. Well, and who am I to doubt Dave? So, yeah, I mean...
that would never happen on this program.
No, not at all. So, I mean, it is, like I said, it's really good by 81 standards. Look, you want to succinctly state Pat Patterson's legacy, I'll do it like this. I think you can make a very strong argument that he is the most important person in the history of the WWF/E behind the scenes that was not a McMahon or in that family. Mm-hmm.
Hard to disagree.
It was said that he was one of the few people that could change Vince McMahon's mind. That's a very short list of people who've been able to do that. So my hat's off to him. You mentioned his creation of the Royal Rumble. Remind me to tell you guys this. I'll tell you more of the story off air. I offended someone very deeply once when I said, I don't think the Royal Rumbles have been very good since Pat Patterson stopped booking them. Could tell you that before. Person got real.
I think I know who that is.
The person got real upset when I said that. Fun times. But and I'll stand by that remark right now. I love how Pat would segment the Rumbles. It wasn't just like a steady stream of people coming out. Now I was told, well, that's what the Royal Rumble is. No, it's not. It was better when Pat booked it. Sorry. We can't, forget about his role as one of the Stooges on screen. They were a very important part of that whole Mr. McMahon character in 1998. I thought the introductions he does at that Over the Edge 98, I'll bring up again, are just unbelievable. I mean, I'm in tears still this day when I watch it, when he introduces Jerry Briscoe and, talks about, the beating Tom and everything like that, and the modern incarnation of Jim Thorpe. I mean, I'm just in tears when you listen to that stuff. I don't know if this is what he would want to be known for, but he was the guy who convinced Bret Hart it was okay to be in the sharpshooter in Montreal. You mentioned,
came up with the spot, but supposedly the story has been he didn't know about the double cross. Maybe that was to protect him. But, because he was so trusted with the boys. Yeah,
but, you mentioned how Pat was always like the go-to guy for coming up with finishes. Yeah, for years. He would come up with good finishes. In that Wrestling with Shadows doc, as a matter of fact, I think they show him multiple times going over finishes with Bret in 97. I think the SummerSlam match with Taker, and then the Canadian Stampede, right? I think it's Bret and Pat
the Canadian Stampede one, you hear a lot of them going back and forth. That was one of the first times I became very familiar with him, and how much Pat Patterson liked to swear. A lot of swearing. By the way, did you know that I think when he got in the wrestling business, he didn't speak any English at all? French Canadian.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you talk about his introductions and what you hear backstage with him, doing that booking and Wrestling with Shadows. Pretty remarkable. But yeah.
And you talk about legacy; it lives on today, even.
Yeah.
I'll bring a little humor to the situation here. He got Linda McMahon to tweet to Stephanie. See that?
Yeah, I saw that.
Justin, you didn't see that, huh? There was a tweet from the Linda McMahon account at Steph McMahon. Think.
That's all it said.
What the hell is that about?
I don't know, but it came right after the news of Patterson passing away.
Yep.
And I think she just forgot to delete it because I think her next tweet started with the word think or something. I don't know what it was, but yeah. It's actually come to think of it, it's probably one of Linda McMahon's better tweets, quite frankly.
Kyle, have you seen much footage of him working with Stevens as the Blond Bombers?
No, not as much as I should have.
Yeah, I haven't either. The
Yeah.
viewers are seeing on the screen right now. I got a picture up of them. I think this is from when they were the AWA tag champs, later, late 70s. But I mean, you go back to the mid 60s when they originally, kind of went wild in California and became such huge stars. But I also haven't either. That's something that I want to go back and watch. Whatever I can get a hold of, at least.
Yeah. Well, when you get to the 70s, all of a sudden, I kind of, my knowledge takes a drastic nosedive.
Yeah.
Sadly. I try to do as much as I can. But yeah, I think, his influence behind the scenes was immense. And, not just the Royal Rumbles, but when Pat kind of fell out of power, for lack of a better phrase, I think it hurt the company, quite frankly, in the early aughts.
Yeah.
He was said, that, there were certain things he didn't, agree with that were going on at that time. People probably know that. And I don't know. To me, creatively, the company was not as good, has not been as good since Pat Patterson has not been in a prominent role.
Agreed.
Do you know about what time frame that was?
Like 03?
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Justin.
The one thing I would just like to point out is it would have happened eventually. I think it was inevitable, but apparently he was a big supporter of some of the quote unquote smaller guys becoming world champions, like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Go ahead, Kyle.
No, he was the guy who came up with the Iron Man match too. He's credited.
Yeah,
that was his idea to at main event WrestleMania 12. He, I think, in that WrestleMania doc spoke, quite with reverence of that idea. He's like, Vince, I've got this idea. Let's let Bret and Shawn go an hour and headline WrestleMania.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and all you have to do is you just need to get on Twitter and look at all the WWE superstars and what they're saying about him to know how important he was. And not only that, but just to see what his eye for talent was. Sami Zayn is on there saying that, for a time, he was the only one that really had his back. Kevin Owens had a really good video talking about Pat Patterson. So I agree with everything you guys have been saying. And especially that I think he's number 2 for like the greatest mind in wrestling history. Or at least WWE history. So.
Yeah, you can make that case for sure. And if you need like kind of a concrete way to see, how good Patterson could be at laying out a match, watch Warrior and Hogan at Skydome, a match that he laid out. It was considered. Remember, in 1990, now guys lay out all their matches ahead of time and know all the spots. That was not the thing. I mean, they actually rehearsed that match beforehand, which was unheard of during that time period. But watch that, and then watch Hogan and Warrior work 8 years later in WCW when Pat Patterson is not agenting the match, and see how shitty that was.
Yes.
Okay, so I mean that's an example of how Pat knew how to put together a match on top like that. So yeah, real good stuff. You talk about some of the eye for talent he had. Ryan, earlier you mentioned The Rock. It's pretty impressive that, and Jim Cornette was also a big supporter of The Rock too. I know some people don't like Jim Cornette anymore, but we should mention. I mean, they went to Vince and they're like, "This is the guy. Like, you need to push this guy."
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, The Rock. I don't know if you know this. He became a very big star in pro wrestling.
Yeah.
If you need any more evidence as to what an icon he is, go watch the Andre the Giant doc, where in the sit-down interviews with Pat Patterson, behind him, he has a framed picture of himself wearing the exact same clothes he's wearing in the interview.
Legend.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's hard to find veterans of the wrestling industry that have been as impactful as he has over the years. I know, like, especially when you look at the tributes that were coming in right after his death, of course. Like, the other one that comes to mind is Dusty. Obviously, everyone talking about Dusty right after his passing. Like, he was like a father figure at NXT in the Performance Center.
Yes.
But man, yeah, Pat Patterson, like, right up there too. I mean, those two, when it comes to the last couple of decades, it's hard to find anyone behind the scenes more influential. And it's a huge loss for the business.
What a motley crew they had in the creative process in the late 90s. Patterson, Bruce Pritchard, Jim Ross, Jim Cornette, and Vince Russo. Imagine being at that meeting.
Now that is some bonus footage I'd like to see thrown up on the WWE Network.
Some tells me that didn't go as smoothly as everyone just kind of nodding at Vince in today's creative meetings, man.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh,
I love the story Jim Ross told. Was it on one of the Dark Side of the Rings or was it his podcast? I can't remember. That he had to carry Jim Cornette out one time because he kept making fun of Kevin Dunn's buck teeth.
I think that was on Dark Side. I'm pretty sure. Okay, I do remember that, though.
I just picture that. He's like, Jim, they know I'm friends with you. You're killing me, man.
Oh, God. Anyways, if you're looking for something to do this weekend, try to look up some old Pat Patterson footage. Rest in peace. Obviously, huge loss. Wanted to pay tribute to a legend of the industry tonight. If we didn't say anything, I mean, that would have been the wrong move because, you got to talk about Pat Patterson a little bit this week, and we're thinking of him and his family for sure.